Okay, another quick fire round, 30 seconds each, gentlemen. Scrapping diversity and inclusion programs. More problems or less problems? Joe Bob, take the lead, please.
Well, if scrapping diversity, equity, and inclusion is solely focused on race, yeah, I don't have a problem with that. I like diversity, but I'd rather have it in thought, in perspective, in occupation, in so many different things other than skin color. I don't quite understand why that plays such a big role in American society. I think the whole purpose of this country is to eliminate that sort of thing. So I'm pro-diversity, but anti if it's only just your skin color.
Dan Perry?
Eliminating these programs certainly risks exacerbating one of the main problems in the U.S., which is, as I say, the large income and wealth gap that causes minorities to be restless. And so, look, I don't think these programs were meant to be forever solutions. They're rather a pathway to a better future where there is true equal opportunity, which would require maybe a different kind of affirmative action, like a massive Marshall Plan for improving education in disadvantaged neighborhoods.
Last but not least, Dr. Omékongo Dibinga, your thoughts?
Well, if Joe Bob's saying he's in favor of diversity but doesn't want to include race, then he's not in favor of diversity. I mean, as Julian Bond said, if you look, you twist the words of America around, it literally spells out "I am race." I worked under Trump's policy, and when he was a president, when I was going to corporations and different things, they were saying, "Don't say this about race. Don't say this about religion. Don't say this about gender." Diversity is not just race; it's gender, and like Joe Bob said, it's diversity of thought, sexual orientation, it's age, physical ability. And if you can't speak about those things, you can't have honest discussions in these companies, and I've seen it firsthand.
Gentlemen, let's feel free to engage in a conversation from this point onwards. Let's circle back to the issue of the Supreme Court itself. Is it becoming too political? Can it ever become apolitical, or return to be, or become, you be the judge of that, apolitical? Joe Bob?
Yeah, I don't really see much in the way of problems with the Supreme Court. Just because it leans right for the first time in a ton of decades doesn't mean that it's a far extreme court. Just a quick statistic to throw out there that I think a lot of people don't know. Only 5% of cases in the Supreme Court in this cycle were a 6-3 decision. In other words, on ideological lines. So the overwhelming majority of the Supreme Court decisions are pretty in agreement with everybody. So the whole idea that the Supreme Court is just off the rails is kind of comical, especially when you look at the entirety of the scope of what they've looked at this term.
Joe, Bob, it would be equally comical not to understand that the majority of cases before the Supreme Court are not by their nature political. So what we should look at is what happens when clearly political cases end up before the Supreme Court. I doubt it's 5% of the cases, probably more like 95% of the cases. And look, to your question, Ellie, it's inevitable when the system of choosing Supreme Court justices is so politicized that they're chosen purely on a basis of their politics, and they're only human beings. They know they have to satisfy the people who appointed them. Indeed, they want to. That's why they're so political to begin with. The system is genuinely broken. If what you want is a Supreme Court that is a bunch of sages, sitting around thinking sagacious thoughts, what we have is a bunch of politicians, and it goes way back to the 5-4 vote that selected George Bush in 2000 when he failed to be elected.
And I would add to that.
Dr.
The election discrepancies in that situation have been proven over and over and over.
Gentlemen, we want to hear all of you. It's difficult at the same time. Dr. Dibinga, please.
So the Supreme Court historically has only overturned about 1% of its decisions that it has made itself. 2 of those happened within the last week. This is a very activist-minded court, and as long as if you're not going to start introducing things like term limits and the like, so people, judges don't hold on until their party person gets into power to elect another Republican or Democrat, it's always going to be politicized. Just like with the cases of how we have district attorneys in this country, but we also have to add the level of corruption in terms of the lack of ethics that they have as a Supreme Court that other judges in the United States have to follow. When you look at, Clarence Thomas, Alito, and some of the things that they've been involved in financially with some of these mega donors, even Sonia Sotomayor recused herself from a case with an author. These are real issues that need real reform in the Supreme Court. So yes, it's definitely political.
And you see the result in the plummeting popularity of the court and the politicized nature of those who like them versus dislike
in the court is because they're doing things that the media doesn't like, and therefore the media is hitting for it. As far as the quote-unquote
the media conspiracy.
Stuff, Nobody's quite sure if they have to report any of the stuff that they're being accused of. And also, you have to say that hasn't influenced their choices in any way, shape, or form. Clarence Thomas
I've been in the media all my life, and only now do I realize I haven't been using all this power.
It's influenced them at all is just ridiculous.
You don't take a trip on with billionaires who have business before the court. Look, Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson, she always voted that way. That's the question. From the Harvard case. Judge Jackson recused herself from the Harvard case.
Guys, let each other speak.
Just because of her affiliation with the university. These people, Alito and Gorsuch, and Clarence Thomas, they've been out with billionaires, people who have had business before the court and didn't recuse themselves, like the basic fundamental things. And this idea that they don't know whether they're supposed to report these things, that's just actually not factual. And at the end of the day, I think we should all agree that they should hold themselves to the same standards that all other judges across the country have to do. You should be able to agree to that.
That's a couple of people on this Supreme Court. It's not a matter of principle. I'd like to address one thing. Ellie, you asked how affirmative action has failed. Here's how I think it's failed. And this runs against the grain of Joe Bob's notion of liberal media conspiring to affect public opinion. We have been allowed to believe that affirmative action places into colleges people who are otherwise disqualified or unqualified, as opposed to the reality, which is that it allows race to be one of many factors. Just as the famous 2019 study at Harvard showed that legacy and other legacy-related issues, which obviously favors white Americans, is a factor. No one actually thinks that a legacy is the only reason unqualified candidates got in, but it's allowed to be a factor. Now, who knows? If race is not allowed to be a factor, because in the real world there is a problem with race relations and the balance of power and of wealth between the races in America, then perhaps we should ban legacy admissions as well. Maybe we will.
Joe Bob.
I said from the onset, yeah, legacy admissions are ridiculous to me as well. But that doesn't mean that justifies letting people into schools based entirely on their race.
Not entirely. Don't repeat it. Joe Bob, it's not entirely.
It's not
a factor.
I'm curious to hear their thought on this. Joy Reid said that when she got to Harvard, everybody was looking at her as if she didn't belong. I have felt that sort of things. I have, by merit, by my work, have gotten myself into some pretty interesting rooms. The last thing that I want is the other people in those rooms wondering if I was skilled at my job or I was here because I was here to check a box and was the token minority. So I felt the same thing as Joy Reid. How we fall on different sides of that issue is beyond me. But I'm curious, what are your thoughts on that?
Let that be our problem. Let that be our problem.
To me, every room I walk into, I know I belong. And I've studied at Georgetown, Harvard, Princeton, Morehouse, MIT. I've never walked into a room and worried about what people cared about, how I got there. And if affirmative action wasn't there, it would be some other reason for people to think that me or you or Joyanne Reid didn't belong. That's what people do. And nowadays, when I look at these college schemes where parents are, paid for admission, who cheated their way to get in, I'm looking at all types of students and wondering about whether they belong. So I don't care about the stigma, and quite honestly, I'm looking at other people differently now too. And Joyanne Reid talked about she's in the classroom.
I want to say one thing, which is that this is
after their father and whether they belong.
This is genuinely a complex issue that I think we should be able to address without partisan bickering. I mean, we don't really want to install people based on a race quota, and quotas are indeed banned in the U.S.
Gentlemen, on that note, I will thank you very much for your time. 2 minutes, and we're back.